Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to take this off for the announcement. I want to thank, who am I going to thank first? I think I'm going to thank this guy, Carl Soehnlein. And I want to thank Ron Goldberg for coming all the way out from New York. And I wrote Carl a little note, and I'm so glad that I was able to be alive to be able to read their books. I mean, it was so great. But I'd like to give a bit of a land acknowledgement, which we like to do, and to acknowledge that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula, and we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. Thank you. So today is World AIDS Day, and so we have two books, and you guys are maybe familiar with the books already, but Mr. Carl, who won the Lambda Award, was that for World of Normal Boys? Which is a great book. It's actually up front. And also, we are filming this tonight, and it will be up on a line soon on our website. And you can also buy copies of the books. The holidays are coming, and I mean, just buying one does that make much sense? But anyway, yeah, this is not the holiday. And Carl is a teacher as well. It teaches at USF. And also you are, did you study with Aaron Shuren?
Yeah, and I taught with him when he was at USF.
Yeah, exactly. So we have Aaron's new book. It's been 25 years, I think, since Aaron's book came out. And we have signed copies, which I'll put up at the front as well. And it's an amazing book about AIDS and dealing with loss, which these books are too, but they're also just full of so much joy. And I guess, once the theater queen, always the theater queen.
Absolutely.
And I wish you would have brought your bullhorn, but,
Well.
that's all right. Oh, I wanted to make one more announcement. I'm sorry. That's not about this, but it's about a little bit later. We are going to have our last event of the year will be the 22nd of December, and it will be with Sabrina Imbler, who is a really interesting naturalist, and she will be in conversation with Heather Smith, who's from Sierra Club, and then also will be introduced by Rebecca Solnit. And she's a very great writer, a queer mixed race person. Actually, I'm sorry, I was saying she is they, and they also have just an amazing take on nature and creatures that don't always quite fit in. So maybe some of us can relate to that. So without further ado, I want to thank you all for coming, and you guys take it away.
Thank you.
About an hour before this reading started, I was texting with a friend who was telling me she couldn't be here because she's recovering from COVID. If you do these kinds of events, the day of the event is when you get all the texts of all the people saying they're not coming. So I was convinced nobody was going to be here. So this is actually really quite wonderful. I had lowered my expectations. Thank you all for making time out in the middle of a cold, wintry Thursday night. And thank you so much to Patrick. This is an independently owned, queer-owned bookstore. I think if you've been here before, and if you haven't, you got a little taste from the shelves that are all pushed to the side tonight, that it's very curated, and I think that's what's so special, and that's what you don't get in the online shopping experience. So I really encourage you to come back and visit again and do some of your holiday shopping at the places that are supporting people like us. So thank you. Thanks, Patrick, Ben, Andy, and our camera person. I didn't get your name tonight, but thank you too. Jesus, thank you. Wonderful. And most of all, thanks to Ron Goldberg, who came out here from New York for this. we'll talk a lot about the uncanny coincidence that we both wound up coming out with books about our time in ACT UP New York right around the same time. But we're going to start out, so that what's going to happen tonight is we're going to each read from our books, and then we're going to talk to each other as kind of like public conversation. And if we have time, we'll take questions from you, and we'll definitely sign some books, so we'll be here for a little while. But the first thing we're going to do in acknowledgement of World AIDS Day is we're both just going to read some names of people who are lost to us because of HIV/AIDS. And I invite you to think of the people you no longer have with you because of this. And if that isn't your past history, just sit and listen. The names that I'm going to read are just a number of people who were part of the community in ACT UP New York who are in this novel in some way or another. Not by name, because this is a work of fiction that I wrote. Ortez Alderson, Charlie Barber, John Gilbert, Oliver Johnston, Larry Kramer, Ray Navarro, Costa Pappas, Warren Pierce, Marty Robinson, Vito Russo, Luis Salazar, Mark Simpson, Kevin Sutton, and Steve Webb. And then Ron.
Bradley Ball, Gary Clare, Spencer Cox, David B. Feinberg, Mark Fotopoulos, Robert Garcia, John Greenberg, Michael Irwin, David E. Kirschenbaum, Tim Kivel, Tony Mulieris, Alden McCain, Michael Morrissey, Howie Pope, Tim Powers, Bob Rafsky, Mark Roberts, David Roche, Lee Shai, Kevin Smith, David Wayne, and David Serco. If there's somebody who, in honor of this day and this experience, you want to just say some names, please feel free to, at this moment, to just, say the name, and we will to honor that person.
Will Mackey.
Michael Mills.
Alfred Garcia.
Eric Jugman.
Bob Dar. Tony Rislicker.
Yeah, I say David Lopez. Alan continue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. May their memories be for a blessing.
Yeah. I'm going to read from my book now.
And now let's talk about fun.
So Army of Lovers, which just came out last month, is a novel. It's a fictionalized version of the time I lived in New York City from 87 to 92, and I got involved with ACT UP, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. And it tells the story of a character named Paul in the first-person voice. Paul's a kind of an alter ego for me. It is a work of fiction, so things are changed and things are... We can talk about that, how you fictionalize your own life. But it is also true in some sense to the amazing history that I lived through and that Ron also lived through. So I'm going to start with a glimpse of being inside a group that regularly does nonviolent direct action, meaning planned civil disobedience where people are going to target a particular politician, institution, media organization, etc., by doing some kind of action that leads to arrests, intentional civil disobedience. So this chapter is called The Place Where We Live. I learned to go limp. In the weeks leading up to demonstrations, or the days, if that's all we have, we educate ourselves and prepare for arrest. There are older guys in our ranks like Floyd, who have been around since Stonewall, and women like Rochelle, the professor with years of feminist activism, who give us history and context, and skills too. Tonight we're being trained as marshals, people whose task it is to steer a protest away from trouble, whether that means a pothole in the street or a cop hungry to make arrests, deliberately provoking the crowd. The training is run by Bryn, a lesbian whose voice is deeper than any man's in the room, and Will, a mop-haired straight guy who introduces himself this way. Everyone thinks I'm gay, but I'm actually a leftist Quaker raised by Jewish communists. To which Bryn replies, that's the gayest thing I've ever heard. They give us lessons in nonviolence, some of them terrifying. If cops on horseback charge at the demonstration, sit down in the street. Sit down? Because the horses will stop. And if you see a cop harassing a protester, demand his badge number. And when you're about to get arrested, go limp. During a break, I spot Timmy, who I haven't seen much of. Oh, you're going to hear a bunch of character names because this is about 60 pages into the book. Just roll with it. During a break, I spot Timmy, who I haven't seen much of in the past few weeks. Where have you been hiding? I ask. He stands next to a guy with mutton chop sideburns and a bandana over shoulder-length brown hair who points a camera at me with the words, "Say AIDS." For real? Your mouth makes a good shape when you say AIDS. Okay, AIDS. He snaps a picture. This is Dale, Timmy says. I'm his new boyfriend, Dale says, while Timmy rolls his eyes as if the label is up for debate. Timmy convinced me to join the revolution. I told him he could take pictures of cute boys, Timmy says. Speaking of which, there's another one. Dale lets out a honking laugh like Pee Wee Herman's. A replica of a laugh, and then cuts across the room, camera up to his face. He's interesting, I say. He's a goof, which is what I need these days. Timmy's expression shifts, and he says, you heard about Keith? I shake my head. What? I haven't seen him since we all went to the pyramid together. He died 2 weeks ago. Really? I say, stunned. Timmy's eyes are clear, blue, and penetrating, and when he locks them on me, I know that if I say another stupid thing like, really, he'll eviscerate me. I'm so sorry, I say. It was PCP that got him. I know what that means. Pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. He had trouble breathing, and the next thing you know, we're in the emergency room. All I know of Keith comes from the long, fun day last June that began with our spontaneous arrest on the courthouse steps and ended with him laughing at me and Derek for our drunken proposition. I remember him walking off into the night with Amanda while Derek and Timmy and I piled into Nicholas's cab. Now, Timmy fills in Keith's life for me. How they met in our class at a state university up the Hudson, then moved to the city and squatted on the Lower East Side until they were booted out. How Keith went from spray painting on the walls of abandoned buildings to starting a tiny gallery in the back of a bar, and how just 6 months ago he'd been hired to teach a design class at Pratt. Everything was looking up for him, Timmy says, but since he didn't have a full-time job, he never had health insurance. PCP smothered his lungs before he'd even been tested for HIV, and he had lain in a city hospital bed half ignored by doctors until Timmy ran through the halls screaming for medical help. I totally went terms of endearment on them, he says. Bryn and Will call us back together. They play the commanding officer to those of us sitting on the community center's linoleum floor, telling us we're trespassing and need to move. We don't move. Then, if you do not leave, you will be arrested. We don't leave. Then Bryn and Will put their hands on us, and we go limp, our arms crossed over our chests, our legs together, bodies like pine planks. If you don't go limp, if you struggle in any way, it's considered resisting arrest, and once you resist, cops have a green light to beat you up. Don't get beaten up. Go limp. The cops will drag you by your shoulders, or if you're lucky, lift and carry you to the paddy wagon like a corpse. We practice this together. We make it fun. But for me, the pressure in the room has changed. The demonstration we're training for in Albany now has a human face. The buzzed head and freckled skin of a boy I shared my first arrest with and flirted with at a drag show, who between that moment and this one suffered and died, uninsured, drowned by poison fluid in his lungs. We are protesting the statewide issues related to AIDS, but its threat has never felt more local. Who among those surrounding me today will be gone, like Keith, before our next protest?
Let's do this so I can at least see the audience. Okay, mine is, this is about Wall Street 2, which is the first anniversary action. ACT UP was founded in 1987, ACT UP New York was founded in March of 1987 with a demonstration at Wall Street. This was 1 year later, and not much had changed about the AIDS crisis except for really us. We had grown larger, more fierce, and had plenty of new tactics to try. March 24, 1988, Wall Street 2. Attention, attention, the AIDS crisis is over. You could all go home. Just kidding. Marshals! It was 6:30 in the morning. Too early for my cool John Lennon sunglasses, but I wore them anyway. They gave my dazed and panicked expression a little don't fuck with me attitude. Alan Klein, for those of you in the know, my co-chair and the comedian with the Bullhorn would be running the day's demonstration, coordinating waves of civil disobedience, or CD, and handling any interactions or on-site police negotiations with CD trainer extraordinaire Jamie Bauer. Though we were the same age, Jamie had a history of street activism that dated back to the 1980 Women's Pentagon action. They'd first come to ACT UP in the spring of 1987 to recruit members for the October Supreme Court CD protest, then stayed to marshal our first Wall Street action. Over the years, Jamie would facilitate Monday night meetings, organize and marshal countless demonstrations, and train a generation of activists in civil disobedience. Jamie's negotiation strategy was simple. We have a right to free speech and freedom of assembly, and we don't have to ask permission for it. And if you want to arrest us for it, that's your business, but we're not going to ask permission. And if you don't grant us permission, we're going to do it anyway. As about 20 of us huddled together in front of Trinity Church, nodding one another's hot pink Marshall armbands, support coordinators checked in CD participants on the opposite corner, collecting emergency numbers and writing down drug regimens. With only minutes to spare, Frank Smithson's truck, stacked with our posters and boxes of freshly printed fact sheets, screeched up to the corner. An artist with a flirty Southern charm, Frank was one of ACT UP's resident rogues who could talk his way into or out of anything. Frank apologized for being late, admitting he'd overslept after a late-night prank removing certain unattended police stanchions and sawhorses. As Frank batted his eyes, I looked around and realized there wasn't a single police barricade in sight. What do we want? A cure for AIDS. When do we want it? Now. Thank you. You recognize. At 7 a.m., hundreds of protesters hoisted their placards and marched in loud and angry circles on the sidewalk in front of Trinity Church. Leafleteers spread out to the surrounding corners, distributing our message to the gathering crowd. We are here on behalf of the 25,000 Americans living with this disease, and out of respect for the 32,000 lost to it. We will not go quietly. We are not going away. While members of Grand Fury, our artist collective, littered the ground with phony money stamped with accusatory messages. Fuck your profiteering. People are dying while you play business. Reporters pointed their cameras and flipped open spiral notepads. The only place we can raise these demands is on the street, explained Jamie. The government is letting people die. We have to fight for ourselves, argued Ortez Alderson. We have no choice but go to jail. Photographers circled around Mark Fotopoulos and his mother with their matching signs. Living with AIDS, 2 years, 11 months and counting. No thanks to you, Mr. Reagan. And loving a son living with AIDS. As the church bells sounded 8 o'clock, the TV trucks raised their towers, ready to broadcast our demonstration live to America. Act up! Fight back! Fight AIDS! 25 protesters linked arms and charged into the street. Spreading themselves out across the width of Broadway, they sat down to an eruption of whistles, cheers, and car horns before disappearing under a crush of cops, cameras, and microphones. But as the minutes trickled by, and much to our surprise, the police made no effort to move or arrest the protesters. Did they think they could wait us out? That we'd get bored and go away? Whose streets? Our streets! After almost 30 minutes, and with traffic backed up for 10 blocks, the police finally relented and began dragging the demonstrators onto empty police bus until the street was cleared. But just as the bus began to pull away, a second wave of demonstrators bolted out of the crowd and hurled themselves down in its path. How many more have to die? How many more? The police, angered by the unexpected turn of events, lumbered off the bus, badge numbers now covered in black tape, and began pulling the protesters by their hair and jerking them to their feet by their jacket collars. Shame! 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 At a far corner, Michael Petrellis and Neil Broom stepped off the curb, unfurled a small American flag, and attempted to set it on fire. Flag burning was a hot political issue that spring, and the two had argued it would be a great hook for the media and the perfect symbol of our anger at the government's negligence. Though the floor had vetoed their proposal, rightly fearing it would distract from our issues, they were told they could still burn the flag if they wanted, provided they distanced themselves from the rest of the demonstration. But as soon as they took out their lighters, Michael and Neil were tackled by the police, who rewarded them with a couple of swift kicks before yanking them to their feet, grabbing them by the neck, and hurling them face first onto the steps of the departing police bus. To regain control of the situation, the police quietly dispatched a group of officers a few blocks uptown to detour traffic away from our demonstration. We countered by secretly sending a third wave of protesters around the corner to Rector Street, where they blocked all the cops' freshly detoured traffic. By the time the police discovered our deception and loaded Wave 3 onto a second bus, our fourth and final wave of protesters burst through the picket line back on Broadway, shouting, "AIDS kills women! Stop the red tape!" and draping themselves and the intersection accordingly in rolls of red tape. After the final group had been hauled away, I grabbed Alan's bullhorn and called the troops back together for a short and enthusiastic send-off. We'll be back, and we'll be stronger! While the demo might be over, we still had to deal with the aftermath. Instead of processing everyone at one station house, the police had scattered our members across several precincts, splintering affinity groups and shredding our support network. As a further challenge, they announced they were going to put everyone through the system, booking them and then shipping them off to the tombs to be held overnight while awaiting arraignment. Since we had no way of knowing who'd been taken where, we'd be unable to track our members and could possibly lose them in the system for hours, if not days. And while extended jail time is never pleasant, it could prove lethal for our HIV-positive members who'd be unable to take their medications while risking exposure to TB and other infectious diseases rampant in the city's jails. We quickly improvised a new support system, transforming a donated apartment into Support Central and recruiting additional members to cover the various precinct houses. Alan handed me the master list of all the arrestees and told me to head to the 13th precinct, where we believed the majority of our members had been taken. I grabbed a cute marshal I'd been eyeing, why not, jumped in a cab, and raced uptown. When we arrived, we found the police bus still parked outside the station house, filled with our arrested comrades laughing and singing songs like on some big gay high school field trip. And when the police finally marched the glee club off the bus and into the precinct house, I marched in right behind them, barely noticing the little sign posted at the top of the stairs, "No unauthorized personnel allowed." Swooping around the detention area like some half-crazed activist anti-MAME, I camped my way from cell to cell, "Darling, those bars are you," and kissing everyone as I checked them off my support list. Before long, an astonished senior officer inquired just what the hell I thought I was doing and ordered me thrown out of the station house. But before I could be dragged outside, I was stopped by another officer who looked me up and down and sneered, "Let's put him through the system, teach him a lesson." I was then hauled off to the back of the precinct house and locked in a small holding cell. It was my first time in jail, and I was pretty freaked out. Not only had I been separated from the rest of the group, no one knew I'd been arrested. If the police decided to move me or take me out the back of the station house, no one would have any idea what had happened to me. I was now a prime candidate for getting lost in the system. And if that wasn't bad enough, My reckless stupidity had endangered the rest of the group because there in my coat pocket was the only copy of our master support list. To calm myself, I thought back to my CD training, and after calculating the risks and benefits of non-cooperation, I decided to cooperate like crazy. I was friendly and talkative, treating my arresting officer with love and dignity, respecting his humanity, and recognizing his capacity for change. My one slight feint towards principled resistance came when I refused to divulge my HIV status, not that I knew it anyway, and I even gave him a small copy of our fact sheet. My charm offensive must have worked because Police Officer Perez, bless his heart, took pity on me and instead of fingerprinting me alone in my cell, paraded me out to the front desk where I could be seen by my colleagues. Thanks to some timely calls from sympathetic city council members and the mayor's gay liaison, the police were persuaded not to put us through the system after all. Once I was released, I joined our lawyer, Joan Gibbs, and my fellow activists outside the precinct house. We waited all afternoon, cheering each arrestee as they emerged from jail, offering them juice and snacks and swapping stories until everyone was free. 3 days later, ACT UP threw itself a more traditional celebration. There was no fundraising or Robert's Rules of Orders, just dancing, drinking, and oh, yes, a talent show. Longtime PWA activist Michael Callan and his group The Flirtations sang their a cappella version of Mr. Sandman. Mr. Sandman, won't you believe, bung, 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 we want a Superman like Christopher Reeve. Give him 2 legs like Greg Louganis, but make him public about his gayness. That's good. Oh, please. Oh, no. I did my imitation of Julie Andrews singing the Tracy Chapman songbook. Don't ask. Well, you can ask later. And Bradley Ball ended the program with his version of Rose's Turn. I did it for you, Steve. It wasn't for me, Larry. And if it wasn't for me, then where would you be? Coordinating committee. For the evening's grand finale, Bradley called everyone back on stage and led the crowd in a breathtakingly arch rendition of Getting to Know You. Much to my delight, everyone spontaneously picked up the movie's cross-armed handshake choreography, proving conclusively that underneath the leather jacket of the most jaded East Village activist beats the heart of a musical theater queen. I couldn't have been happier. The whole week, the demonstration and the party that evening was like falling in love, not with a person, but with a group. ACT UP was more than just a remarkably effective activist organization. It was the community I'd always been looking for. And then David got sick.
So if you haven't figured out, Ron's book is not fictionalized. That is like data and detail, and we're going to talk more about that. I'm going to read one more shorter piece. So you got a sense, I think, from the talent show that there was a lot of socializing that was part of this group. And I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to read to you a scene. Paul, the narrator, his boyfriend, Derek, his family lives in Long Island, and Derek's mother, Marilyn, is out of town, and we're going to have a pool party at their house. Derek has a key to their house, so when they travel, we go out to their place and use their pool. In the summer of '88, we invite a bunch of friends for a party, and in the middle of it, Marilyn phones. I stand near Derek as he talks to her, motioning the rest of us to quiet down. Just a few people, Marilyn. Don't worry. We're not wrecking the house. We'll clean everything up. We won't bother the neighbors. Placating and reassuring until at last he explodes and hangs up. He turns and announces, she says she's going to have to drain the pool. Good, someone says. Then I won't feel guilty about peeing in it. And I won't feel guilty about coming in it. And that turd I left in there won't be a problem. Should we start the blood orgy? Derek laughs, despite himself. Nicholas, in earshot of the entire call, says, Derek, honey, call your mama back and ask her where she keeps her coffee filters. I'm not calling her back. Then give me the number and I'll ask her. You wouldn't. Want to bet? Nicholas, she probably doesn't even know where the coffee filters are. Jessa's the only one who knows anything. Give me the number. I watch all of this with delighted glee. Nicholas, into the phone. Hi, Marilyn, this is Nicholas. No, ma'am, we haven't met. We're looking for your coffee filters. That's right, we're making coffee. We found the beans and the grinder, but not the filters. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, there they are. Kind of out of the way, no? Don't worry, we'll rinse the pot out before we leave. I'll personally do it myself. Very nice to meet you. Fun party, by the way. Bye, darling. Derek stares, stupefied. How freaked out did she sound? She sounded just fine, knew exactly where the filters were. First cabinet on the right, third shelf next to the wheat germ. She has wheat germ. I say, if anything's put back in the wrong place, she will know it. If anything's out of place, Nicholas corrects, she'll get off on it. But I'll never hear the end of it, Derek moans. Well, now you're just tempting us. Indeed, as the day goes on, the boys hide things for Marilyn to find when she gets home. Like a Speedo, skimpy and shiny, still smelling of chlorine, tucked under the couch in the forbidden all-white living room. Okay, I know this sounds childish, but I ask you, what was that draining the pool about, if not the sharp stick of stigma poking at us? And didn't she once scold Derek and me with clucks of her tongue and worried, darting eyes as his hand brushed my cheek in a restaurant for our public affection? Marilyn and Fred were sensible, middle-of-the-road moderates who were not our enemies, but had not extended themselves as allies either. My parents were better on this front, but they too were only making small steps forward. We all came from families like this, many of them worse. A family member at an ACT UP meeting was as exotic as a snow leopard. One night when Gilberto was giving a majority actions report, he introduced his grandmother to the room, and we all rose to our feet applauding as if Judy Garland herself had risen from the grave. Beneath our furious surface, we were starving for allies, for their approval and their presence among our ranks. I felt angry at my mother and father, the way I felt angry at anyone who hadn't personally taken up the cause of AIDS activism. Why were we fighting this alone? Wasn't our struggle our families too? Today, older than my parents were then, I understand how frightened they must have been to see their son vilified and marked for disease. But in those dark, heady times, the lines seemed clear. We fought for our lives, for our love, for basic respect, without their help. Note to self number 4. Oh, so there's these sections in the book that they sort of stand out as the narrator sort of making notes about the story he's telling. Notes to self number 4. Remember all the details of the pool party. Broke into the liquor cabinet, which was locked behind a sliding wood panel. Sawed a 1/4 inch off the end of that panel in order to get it relocked at the end of the day. Posed for photos for Dale around the pool, on the diving board, on the inflatable rafts, and in every room of the house. Witnessed this interlude. Elliot sits in a poolside lounge chair wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and dark glasses covered from neck to ankle in a loose caftan, reading the autobiography of Shelley Winters. Nicholas smoking a cigarette on the deck. Elliot, you're too young to be a caftan queen. Elliot not looking up from his book. You're only as old as you feel, and today I'm feeling dusty. Walked in on Derek fucking Raymond on all fours in Derek's childhood bedroom in front of a mirror that had a Duran Duran decal on it. Watched for a moment, but didn't join. Found a bottle of just expired Valium and passed it around. Raided Marilyn's closet. Applied Marilyn's lipstick. Watched Mahogany on the VCR while high on Valium wearing Marilyn's clothes. Got into a late-night drunken argument with Derek. Made up and slept it off. Thank you. Thank you so much. So let's talk.
Yeah.
If we sit, can you see us, or should we stand for this? Stand for
All
the
right, then, here we go.
stand in the place where you live.
And I was going to go with Sly and the Family Stone. That's because I'm older than you. And I thought you said your book was fiction.
So one of the things we had talked about when we were preparing for tonight was how surprised we were to be surprised at how much our stories overlap, because we were there side by side. Like one of the things that I was really surprised when I read Ron's book was that the meeting that I describe as the first time my narrator went to ACT UP was the exact same meeting that you went to. Is that a fact for
Yes.
you?
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what happened at that meeting?
Sure. So I had actually gone. I'd gone to the center to attend a different meeting. It was just before the. It was a couple of months before the March on Washington, the big March on Washington in 1987, and I thought, okay, this is my chance to get involved. I felt the need to sort of join something, fighting back, being powerful for the community, and I went to this meeting, which was anything but. And then, as the meeting was ending, this other group started filtering into the room, and I'm like, oh. This must be ACT UP. I'd read about them in the Native. I'd signed a petition, and at one point, and these were like, there was just this energy in the room that was just sort of like, let me just stand by the door and watch for a couple of minutes. And the big argument that day was they were getting ready for Gay Pride, and it was, let's have a concentration camp float in Gay Pride. And hands went up and people were like, oh, wait, this should really about, the young kids today don't know that people are dying about AIDS. This is about, death and people are dying. And someone else is like, no, it's about people living with AIDS, and back and forth and back and forth. And it was this incredible conversation. With all these sort of realities and sensitivities I had no idea about. But I was like, wow. This is exciting. Something is happening here. And they went with the concentration camp float, which was incredible. There's a photo of it in my book. It's literally, it was a flatbed truck with barbed wire and, watchtower, and guarded by, people in Reagan masks and, rubber gloves, because the police would always wear rubber gloves. And not like, these were the yellow, the bright yellow kitchen sink yellow gloves, because after all, we were vectors of infection, and, oh my God, we were going to bite them, spill our blood on them, whatever we were going to do.
Yeah.
And the concentration camp float was incredible because it still was at that time, you know how Pride is, right? I mean, I don't know how it is here, but in New York, it's like, is it a march? Is it a parade? Is it a floor wax? Is it a dessert topping? It's, it was just, and for ACT UP, it was a march. This was about politics. We were going to get people. And it was to shock them because at the time, actually just before Pride, Jesse Helms went on, and they were going to pass a law about quarantine and, that mandatory testing. And then what would happen for people who tested positive? We would quarantine them. So the idea of concentration camps for people with HIV was not some weird way off idea. This was like in the air. This was being talked about in Congress and around the country. So that's...
Yeah, and I was at that meeting too, and I had a very similar experience. I also showed up first for this March on Washington meeting where they were fighting about. I remember a very specific argument that someone stood up and wanted to basically stop the whole march because they hadn't included a platform about the separation of church and state in the demands of the march. And so that just took over the whole meeting. And, as a young person who had decided I'm going to be involved in my community, it was like, no, is this my community? Is this what we do, is just scream and fight each other? And then suddenly there was this ACT UP meeting where it was like there was just this energy culminating in something really brazen and creative and crazy. And I talk about this in my book as well. So there's the moment that is actually quite true, which is that my boyfriend, who was Alan in real life, the famous Alan, who worked with Ron really closely to do a lot of the organizing of actions, but who in the book is fictionalized as a character named Derek. So we were sleeping in my house in New Jersey. At the time, my parents would let Alan come over the house, but they would say you have to sleep in separate bedrooms because you're not married, which I was like, hello. But we would sneak, like they would go to bed and we would sneak into the same bed. And then my dad got this phone call and it was like, Carl, pick up the phone. And I'm like in the guest room with Alan. And I'm like, I got it, hang up. And it was Stephen Webb from ACT UP who was like, will you work the booth for the parade? And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, great. I signed up. I'll do it. He's like, that means you can't march. Everyone's marching and you're not going to be able to march. And I was like, okay, sure. I'll do it. I was like, sign me up, coach. Like I would do anything at that point. And he was like, great. And so then Alan and I got to the parade and then we realized like, there's no one else here. Like we are it, right? And so there was like my first introduction to ACT UP, which was basically like you sign up, you do it. Like that's it. Like there's you're not turning to anyone for permission. You're not getting like delegated or assigned. Like, I mean, those were really true in the early days, and then it changed a lot over time. So how did you wind up being the person who was basically like organizing the actual demonstrations?
Well, I mean, there were like 5 standing committees, maybe 6. I'll count them out now. There was fundraising, and I wasn't going to do that at all. There was issues, which was really at that time, even then, very much around drugs and whatever. And my idea of science was like earth science that I took in like 10th grade, and that was it. So I wasn't going to go with issues. There was media. And I didn't really know how to do that. And then there was zaps, which zaps were these things that were passed down really from Gay Activist Alliance. And it was these, for us, it was these immediate actions. It would happen. Someone would come to the floor with, the day's outrageous, happening. And anyone want to work on this? And they would go to the back of the room and they would figure out an action to do within the week. And it would just be involved with those people. And Zap usually was like right in your face. It was, you're going to the office, you're going in front of the building. It was very direct action. And that terrified me. But the idea of these other actions, which were sort of planned, was like putting on a show, which I knew how to do. I know that's a shock to all of you. So that seemed like, oh, I can do this. So I joined the committee and, had my first ACT UP boyfriend, because that's what we did.
Who was your first ACT UP boyfriend?
Eric Rose. I do name him in the book. I didn't last name him because he was alive. I didn't have permission, but it's Eric Rosenblatt. And
we want all the dish. It's just us and the camera.
Exactly. Right. Forgot about that. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Eric.
And then we broke up. And as soon as we broke up, it's like, okay, I need something to do. Oh, I'll chair the committee. So that's what I did. With Alan.
Yeah, my early thing was I was on the outreach committee, which was like we were going to like bring more people into the group, and it was like my first lesson in how clueless, sheltered, and inexperienced I was, not just with organizing and activism, but with like, I don't know. I guess what you would say today was it was like the first time like I ever had to deal with my privilege, my white privilege, my male privilege, right? Because we were having all these like really intense discussions about how we're going to get more people in. And then, very rightly, an older black activist in the group would just say like, do you realize how you're talking like us and them, and you're going to get them to join in? And who do you think us is and who do you think them is? And the first name I read on our list of the deceased tonight was Ortez Alderson, who you also mentioned. Ortez was an amazing activist. He'd been involved with the Black Panther Party.
Did you know that at the time? Because it wasn't until I read like the oral histories and someone was mentioning it and I looked him up on I did the Google, as the kids would say. And it was like, oh my God, he was like the queer at 17. He was like the queer representative to the Black Panthers and was arrested. He was part of the Pontiac 5 who like burnt draft records and he was in jail for 2 years. I was just like, holy shit.
I didn't know all that, but what I remember most about him was he came into this meeting of the outreach committee where we were doing like our well best to try to expand the diversity of the group. And because it was a majority white and majority male group very much at the beginning, and that continued to change over time. But Ortez, I'll never forget, it was like the fall of 1987, and he listened, and I knew when he spoke, the room was going to change because I was very tuned in, and he said, "Do you know what happened today?" And I was like, "Oh my God, what happened today? I don't know." And he said, "James Baldwin died today." And I was like, okay, I kind of know who James Baldwin is. And he just like fucking read us all. And then he just walked out. And I went home that night to Alan in our apartment in Astoria at the time, and I just bawled. And you want to talk white tears, people? I fucking bawled. I was like, I don't know anything. I don't know what I'm doing. And it was like a really interesting, like in the moment, kind of, awakening, consciousness raising, deepening of one's politics, recognizing your place in community. I mean, that is also what was going on in ACT UP, right? Was that we were working together to build each other into people who really understood who was in the room and who we were talking to and what subjectivity we were talking from and all that. So that was joining outreach, which I thought was just going to be like, I'll get people, I was like Julie the Cruiser. I'm friendly, I was like the student council secretary in high school. And I quickly learned, that was not where I was anymore. So, yeah. So I want to ask you about the timeline, because you and I had a conversation many years ago when I was first trying to put this book together. I came to New York and we were talking about ACT UP, and you said, well, I have this timeline. So I think that's kind of the origin of The Boy with the Bullhorn, is it started with you just keeping track of what happened. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So actually when I started writing the book, which was actually in 1994, I didn't work all the way straight from 1994, but I did, as I was sort of drifting out of ACT UP, because you didn't really leave, you sort of drifted out. There was no slamming of the door, unless you were Larry Kramer, and then you slammed the door, and this group, you sissies, and you were done. And then he would come back 3 weeks later, and,
True. All true.
which is all true. We used to call him Tanta Larry. It was like, Auntie Larry, it was just
or Uncle Larry, yeah. It
Yeah.
depended who was saying it, yeah, but for sure, yeah. Yeah.
The crazy uncle at
He
Thanksgiving.
would tell us we were doing everything wrong, and then he would leave.
Storm out.
We'd keep working,
And then he'd come back.
and we'd have to listen to him again.
But what was I talking about?
The timeline.
The timeline. So I had all these date books, right? I mean, back before everything was on your phone, you had date books. And so I had all these date books, and I went through and I started putting this on, into a timeline. I knew I needed, I'd never written a book. I'd never written anything longer than maybe an article. And so I knew I needed some sort of what happened? What was that? What was that experience? So I put together this timeline, and and then I also looked at my files and my, and stuff online later on. And basically this timeline is what was going on internally. I had access to Bradley Ball when he died. We donated his files to the New York Public Library. Before then, I actually Xeroxed his files. And Bradley was the first secretary of ACT UP. He took notes at the first meeting. He was basically handed a pad, a big, one of those big, pads when you have a brainstorming session, and it's like, they handed it to him and he wrote, what was being said. It was like, what should be our first demonstration? And at the end of the meeting, he still had the pad. So he went home, typed up the notes, and had been taking notes every meeting since. So I had a sense of internally what was going on for the first year and a half, my own notes. And so it's what was going on internally, what actions were going on, all in different colors, by the way. What was going on, what actions were happening, what was happening sort of in the AIDS world, what drugs were being things, what hearings were being held, any sort of real, landmark events that were happening, and then who died. And it was in a Word doc. So it's a Word table, and it's like 58 pages, and it's actually online at www.boywithabullhorn.com. But it was something I gave it to Larry, I gave it to Sarah, whoever asked for that, I would, just give it to him. But it's this really sort of incredible tool. Ideally, I would love to, if there's any wealthy, Bill Gates is here. What I'd really like to do is digitize it and link it to fact sheets and videos. And so it's like, oh, here's this demonstration. Oh, look, there's the fact sheet. Oh, here, this is, but that sort of became the spine in a lot of ways of the book, because I decided to write it looking forward, not looking back. Part of this was it's when you talk about, you're learning about the community. And I mean, my book is an activist education. It's really like sort of how I came to understand that, oh, my community is not this, it's this. And what my privilege is and what, how I fit in. And it was really learning the interconnectedness of things. And AIDS was sort of amazing for that because it really touched on so many issues and
absolutely.
communities. So the timeline sort of became, the spine of the book in a lot of ways.
So I'm really curious because I had already written a bunch of books before I sat down to write this one. But what made you think you could write a book? It's not a thing that like everyone's like, I'm going to write a book because I have a lot of information. I mean, were you just? I mean, at what point did you say, I'm not just handing the timeline to other people who are writing, I'm writing my own book?
I started writing the book. I mean, I knew very early that we were a part of taking part in history.
Yeah.
It was very clear. There was a moment, and I read about this in the book, at the March on Washington, actually. And we brought like 200 people down, and we had our, Silence Equals Death t-shirts, and we had these, Silence Equals Death posters and AIDS-gate posters, which is like Ronald Reagan. If you've never seen it, it's sort of this silk screen of like Ronald Reagan with hot pink rat's eyes stamped on a bilious, like chartreuse background with AIDS-gate across it. And and we were selling buttons and t-shirts and whatever. And we came down with 200 people, but within a day or two, I would see these buttons and t-shirts on all sorts of people that were clearly not a part of ACT UP New York. And it was just like, and everyone just sort of, you kind of looked at people's eyes. I remember Maria particularly was just sort of like, what is going on? And it's like, wow, this is going to be a movement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And which is an incredible thing to experience. And so I was always aware of that. And I always possibly naively thought, well, I'm going to be negative. I'm not going to be HIV positive. I'm going to survive. And as a survivor, my responsibility is to write this down and remember it. Mm-hmm. And that's what it was. And the book was it's really weird because it was just something I felt like I had to do. And I just did it. And it's that, and I said, even if I have to, hit the print button myself and send it out, that's what I'll do because it was a responsibility. It was a mission. It was a passion. I mean, it at least sounds kind of odd, but it was just something I had to do. And so I did it.
Snaps to this queen. He did it really, really good. And what I love about the fact, so we're in this strange moment where like for years there was nothing really in the culture about ACT UP. David France did a documentary called How to Survive a Plague. It's about 10 years ago. It got nominated for an Oscar. So that was one of the first kind of cultural moments where there was the looking back. And that ignited a lot of dialogue within the community about like, well, he's focusing on these 5 treatment activists. And, there was a lot of kind of people like, but ACT UP was so much more than that. So there was also the ACT UP Oral History Project, which Sarah Schulman and Jim Hubbard started with a grant. Which is
amazing.
Which is a fantastic resource. Go online. We're both interviewed in it along with 180 other people or something. And it's just ACT UP New York, and it's just some of the people in ACT UP New York. That became the basis for Sarah's book, Let the Record Show, which is kind of like taking that oral history collective and turning it into a narrative with a lot of really, really smart analysis of kind of what ACT UP was kind of all about. Peter Staley wrote a book called Never Silent.
There was also the United in Anger, the documentary
Anger.
that Jim Hubbard and Sarah Schulman put together, which used the oral histories, but also footage.
Right.
Because, I mean, ACT UP, the thing about ACT UP is that we filmed everything. I mean, it came about around the same time as the camcorder, and we had video activists.
Sorry, the things that, the camcorder.
Yeah. So
we also did fax zaps. Okay?
Yes, fax. Yeah, I had to explain that once. It's like,
and you would just get someone's fax number and you would just jam it. You would send like all these.
Well, you'd tape all the fact sheets together in a loop so that it would just keep going. So until it ran out of paper, on the other side. Yeah. That's.
You can try to kill the queens, but they will fight you hard, honey. Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that's come out, but it's interesting in a way. It's taken because people say to me, "Why now?" And I don't know why now. I think it's taken a generation for us to be able to kind of say, okay, we are still here. We were witnesses to history, and it's time for these stories to get out. And somehow the culture has made some space for it. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really know. People keep saying, why now? Why are there all these ACT UP books? And I'm like, well, also, there are like 5. Okay. And they're all basically those of us who were in New York. And ACT UP was international. It was certainly national, and it was definitely international. And those are all stories to be told as well.
Actually, if you haven't seen the movie BPM, the French movie, for all the documentary stuff, that movie, and it got ACT UP better than anything I've seen. And it's weird. They had different, they would snap. We weren't snapping in New York. We were yelling. But, what they capture is it sort of ricochets between like the dance floor and sex, and it starts up with a demonstration that goes wrong. And it's just like that's ACT UP. That's the ACT UP I recognize.
Yeah, it's in French, so I didn't recognize that part. But they do have constant.
We spoke French in the Actions Committee.
L'action
comité de l'action. Ouais.
No, but anyway, that movie has a lot of like the meetings and the arguments and the political kind of infighting that happened inside the group as well. Should we ask people for that? Because we could just talk all night.
Yeah.
If we could come up here to Jesus to use the microphone for the questions so they can be on.
Would you like to come up to speak into the mic so we can make you part of the public record?
Yeah.
Why not? Oh, it's David.
So my name's David, and I was living in New York City beginning in 1983. So one of the first things I remember in terms of a reaction to the disease was people gathering in homes to strategize as to how they could best serve those who were falling ill. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering if either one of you had that experience prior to your activism. And then I have a second question, and that would be, were there models for you to think about at the time? Because one of the models I've thought about over the years is the radical Catholic left's actions against the Vietnam War. So, yeah, those would be my questions.
You take that.
Okay. Actually, I didn't know anyone who was sick before I joined ACT UP. One of the reasons I didn't join GMHC, which had like a buddy program where you would volunteer and you would you would help someone who was sick. You would help them either with their meals, get them to the doctor's office, be support, whatever. And that actually terrified me. I was really nervous about being able to create sort of a boundary between myself and someone my age or around my age who was dying. I just didn't think I could handle it. And ACT UP, again, it's like putting on a show. I could do that. I could be angry in the streets. I could do that. So I didn't know anybody. And later, of course, I joined ACT UP to get away from people dying from AIDS. Didn't think that through terribly well.
No, you did not. You did not. Yeah. I was too young. I joined ACT UP right out of college. I was 21 years old. And, one of the things that's really meaningful to me about the older people who were in the group were some of them did have a history of activism. Mm-hmm. So there were people who were involved with the Black Panthers, the women's reproductive rights movement, the anti-nuke movement. You name it, anything, certainly the queer liberation movement that came up after Stonewall. And all of those groups contributed different things, like talking, as you did in your reading tonight, Jamie Bauer having a history of civil disobedience in the women's movement. And so we learned a little bit from a lot of different people. We learned from people who did stuff, right? So it as much as we're talking about consciousness raising and awareness and all that, everything happened in the context of action. ACT UP always had a target, a demand, a plan, a backup plan. I mean, it really was about looking for models around civil disobedience, particularly nonviolent direct action, right? And so anyone who had something to offer, we took it.
I mean, I want to say there was one of the most impactful things. We used to also do teach-ins, which was really important because, I mean, it was like, this is how drugs are tested. This is the process. This is how this happens. But it was also around, city issues, around homelessness, around IV drug use. The most amazing teach-in for me was the Women in AIDS teach-in, which I kind of went to out of a sense of obligation. It's like, well, the women have been there, and I'll go, and it'll probably be this sort of, a lot of isms, and I'll just, but it's important that I go. And what I got was an education. I got the language for my activism. The connection between how much, and when I was researching, because I was actually worked with David France on his book, I was doing a lot of research for him, and going into Michael Callan's notes, he very clearly talks about how the Denver principles and all the sort of PWA empowerment is based on feminism and the women's health movement. ACT UP and the whole AIDS activist thing is so inexorably tied to what we got from the women's health movement. And
and can I just jump in, because a lot of what you hear in the AIDS narrative as it gets unspooled in media is that women took care of gay men while they were dying.
They taught us.
Yeah, they were warriors and fighters in the streets. They were not nurses. We were all nurses too, but I think it's really important that people know that this group was full of seasoned female activists who were teaching a lot of very inexperienced men who were theater queens or college students or whatever, what civil disobedience even was.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot also from the community that was very active in New York City, dealing with the part of the epidemic that was about IV drug use, the transmission of AIDS through needles. One of the things I remember putting together as part of the group in this outreach committee early in ACT UP was we put together a whole IV drug use kind of town hall meeting, which we did at the Allcraft Center on St. Mark's Place, right? And it was so fascinating because what happened was we brought all these community people together, and it was this really intense discussion between the clean and sober abstinence people and the harm reduction needle exchange people. And it was again, mind blown, 21 years old, I smoked pot and did coke. I didn't know anything from shooting up in the streets of New York and the population that was really deeply, deeply impacted and had nothing like a direct action group meeting every week. So yeah, moments like that where there were other communities doing work that were coming together and educating this particular population of people who were okay, great, now let's go get arrested, make something happen. And ACT UP did. The needle exchange people in ACT UP got needle exchange in New York City. Snaps to that. I mean, there was no needle exchange without ACT UP.
Yeah, I mean, there was a program that the city started, that Koch started, which of course he did without doing any sort of work with the communities. He just sort of imposed it. So that went over really well. And that, when Dinkins took over, that was being disbanded. And our needle exchange committee was okay, they were doing their own needle exchange programs in Lower East Side and I think up in Washington Heights. And they said, okay, let's get arrested because we need to get this into the court and have it. And what they wanted to do was have it litigated in so that this was a necessity. They were going to argue this was necessity. The idea that needle exchange was so important that this couldn't be illegal. What we were doing is not illegal. This is actually saving lives. And they did it.
They won. Yeah. They had a legal defense that actually won and changed the course of that particular needle exchange. Other questions? Anything? AMA?
While we're waiting, I can do Julie Andrews does the Tracy Chapman songbook.
Thank you. Please.
For those of you. So it's okay, this was the talent show, and I used to do this, and people would call out, we're doing this. So it'd be I've got a fast car. I've got a ticket to get us out of here. Been working at the convenience store, planning to save a little bit of money. Or like, don't you know, talking about a revolution sounds like a whisper, etc. and so forth.
Ron used to teach us chants in the voice of Julie Andrews too. That was also that's how you learn chants, is you sing them.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. The reason why the book is called Boy with a Bullhorn is I was ACT UP's unofficial chant queen. Again, it's like putting on a show. So I would write them, but I mean everyone sort of contributed chants. But the thing about chants is, for us, they were sort of like an armor. One, because you didn't know how people were going to react to you. And if you did a chant that was really angry or passionate, it created space. You know, it's like, okay, we're not going to mess with these people. They're angry. It also was like great sound bites. I mean, if, you know, and it gave people, I mean, one of the reasons we did the teach-ins was so everyone was, you know, we are the experts, which is, again, women's health. It's, you know, that we are, you know, we are the experts. You can put a mic in front of anybody at a demonstration. Why are you here? And the chants would give them sort of a really quick soundbite. You know, we are here because healthcare is a right. Healthcare is a right. You know, it's like, and so it provided information. It told people why you were there, and it also created this unity. And it kept, and if your protest, if your chant had a little rhythm, it also helped you, you know, go for a while because, you know, running around in a circle saying, you know, how many more has to die is, there's a chant that this is what would happen. And Carl brings this up in his book.
Yes. Yes. How many more have to die became Harmony Moore has to die. And we would make up stories about who Harmony Moore was.
And why did she have to die?
Why did she have to die?
Well, this is kind of a question for Carl, I guess, but, you know, if you want to chime in too. But, you know, so like in 92, you left New York, and I guess did you come directly to San Francisco?
With a 10-month detour in Tucson, Arizona, where I started grad school.
But so I was wondering if you had experience with ACT UP in San Francisco and how that compare and contrast.
That's a great question, and I don't really have an answer because I was pretty burnt out on ACT UP and decided I was going to go to grad school for writing. And so when I came to San Francisco to be part of a graduate writing program at San Francisco State, where I got my master's. And I sort of dipped in here and there to a meeting, but I was kind of done. There is a scene in my book, late in the book, where the character goes to San Francisco and attends a Queer Nation meeting in San Francisco. And there's a whole part of my book that's about Queer Nation, right, which was like a non-AIDS specific LGBTQ. Well, we didn't say LGBTQ in 1990. We said basically gay and lesbian is what we said. Yeah. But we were the first, you know, group to call ourselves queer. And I went to the Queer Nation meeting in San Francisco, and I actually found my diary from that meeting. So the scene that exists in that book will give you a taste of what my experience of Queer Nation was, which I'll tell you one example. It's very relevant for Ron being here tonight. So I went to a meeting which it turned out ran on consensus instead of on majority vote. So ACT UP in New York ran on majority vote, which was great because even if you didn't all agree, if enough people agreed, you would say, yes, we're doing this action, and you go do it. And the people who didn't want to do it didn't have to do it. But Queer Nation in San Francisco ran on consensus, which is, I think, personally, impossible for direct action. Like, you'll never do anything. You just won't. And it was proven that night because they were having a discussion about whether they were going to assign money for a bullhorn.
There we go.
Yeah. And
see, it's all a circle.
And because it had to be 100% consensus, if someone didn't want to do that, it would fall. And that night, someone raised his hand and said, "I'm going to block the money for the bullhorn because it gives one person a louder voice than everyone else." Conclude what you will about the effectiveness of that. So, yeah, and I mean that's, you know, maybe a pot shot at all the good activism that went on out here. But for me, I wasn't actually involved in it. And I wish there were more stories about what went on out here, which was really, really important. Peter Staley's book and Ron's book both talk about the AIDS conference. Yeah. The big San Francisco.
And
AIDS
actually,
conference.
I did a talk at my alma mater. I went to Binghamton in New York, and one of the professors there did a book about ACT UP LA.
Oh, okay. We should read that.
Yeah, I'm good. It's on the stack.
Okay, good. What's it called?
Oh, Act Up LA. I don't know.
All right. We're in a bookstore. Maybe you can find out.
I look it up. You can Google it.
All right. Next question, please. Hi.
As you guys are giving this presentation, you're using a lot of humor, and you're describing humorous scenes. But I was wondering, with the reality of when you were actively in this group, how much was humor a part of regular interactions? Was it 1 in 10 interactions? Was it every meeting? Was it hand in hand with anger? How much was humor a part of it?
I love that question. I mean,
It was a lot. I mean, basically, Act Up was very funny. It was very sexy. It was, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. I think it's people were surprised because our reputation was really angry. But Act Up was very campy. I mean, it sort of embraced sort of camp humor. I mean, talent shows. I would do song parodies with Bradley. There's a section in my book where it's like, after the meeting, we're going through like the Act Up songbook, and it's like, Larry Kramer is singing, Phil Donahue, I'm going to be on Phil Donahue. I mean, it was just like, it was very much hand in hand. And I think a lot of that is, it's very queer. And it was so intense. The humor is really, it could get very dark. And there was certainly anger, and there was certainly, it was brutal. It was a brutal time. It was also joyous. I think, it was the most important thing, I ever did. It was the hardest, the most difficult, the most joyous, the most sex I ever had. It was just, it had all of that.
yeah.
And I think that was really important because we wouldn't have survived without it. Because it was heart-wrenching what was going on. It was brutal.
Yeah, I think humor is a little bit of a protection against the pain, right? So that scene that I read, I don't know if that was word for word how it happened at the pool party. There was a pool party, but I remember my boyfriend's mother telling him over the phone, "I'm going to have to drain the pool."
Yeah.
Which is a horrible thing to say to your gay son and his friends, some of whom have HIV, right? But immediately it was like, well, then I'm going to go piss in it and I'm going to go shit in it. It's like you just immediately turn it into something like you get above it, right? By finding what's funny in it, which, and maybe you go home and cry later, or maybe, there was so much difficult emotion, but together we could make a lot of space for humor. Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hey.
Hello. Hey, hi. Come along on this journey with me. I went to Reno a few weekends ago to knock on doors for the Senate race there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Castro. Thank you.
Catherine Cortez Masto.
And what I was observing when I was there is that most of the unpaid volunteers were Jews from the Bay Area, and most of the paid volunteers were people of color that worked with the union that I was working with. And I just have had, I'm Jewish. I was in ACT UP with these guys. I was younger than Carl at the time. I'm younger than Carl. So my memory
still younger than Carl.
Sorry. My sort of overview of I didn't really have a context for any of it. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Upon reflecting on it all over the decades, my question for Ron primarily is, what was Jews ran ACT UP in many ways.
Or the Catholics. It was the same.
Yeah. So,
which in New York is essentially the same thing.
So in real progressive political spaces, that seems to be real in the coastal United States that I've lived in for my entire life. So was that ever acknowledged there? And if so, this is in all the books, in Peter's book, in Sarah's book, in your book, and David Francis, this is never really bubbled up to the surface. I'm just wondering if there was a sort of collective understanding about the fact that fucking Jews show up in this country and run shit Kanye.
Yeah, about that. I mean, it's very funny. I kind of joke that the target audience of my group is like, the Venn diagram is like activists, LGBT, progressive temples, and it's like right there. And I spoke at my sister's temple in the Berkshires a month or two ago, and before she said, is there anything Jewish in the book? And I'm like, oh my God, my entire book is Jewish. Listen to me, But I think actually the place where it became palpable. I mean, look, we started with Larry Kramer screaming Holocaust. We started with the Silent Sequel Death Project had a Holocaust, had the emblem for it wasn't just LGBT. It was anyone who was sexually deviant, the pink triangle, which, by the way, which is supposed to be this way down, and I have it from Avram.
A Jew by the name of
Avram Finkelstein happens to be Jewish, said that they didn't really know which direction it should go. They weren't sure, but they thought it looked better this way, and that's what they did. And then when they were asked about it, they said, of course, that's what we meant. It was, this was to take the negative and turn it into a positive, which is very much what ACT UP did all the time. It's like, no, we meant to do that. No, that's what we meant to do, because, right. Oh God. The place where it really came up was the Stop the Church demonstration, which was the big demonstration at St. Patrick's. And everyone agreed that the church was a legitimate target. Cardinal O'Connor was terrible on LGBT issues. On AIDS, he was like horrifying. And the idea of protesting at the church was fine. There was then the affinity groups that wanted to go inside, which were mainly organized by Catholics who felt betrayed by their church. Interestingly, during the discussion, I think a lot of the pushback of like, we shouldn't necessarily be doing anything inside the church came from the Jewish members. I remember Maxine, me, Greg. I mean, there was a bunch of people just sort of like, going into the religious thing is maybe not the thing to do. And, I think for me, it came from the sense of, if it had been a Hasidic temple, right? And they're terrible. Right. Sorry. They're terrible on this stuff. And I would have thrown myself in front of the door before I let anyone go in. And that's my take on it. And I think that was sort of an interesting place. That was an interesting discussion. Of course, we all showed up at the demonstration. And I was outside marshaling because I thought we were going to get our heads kicked in, because the police weren't going to, bang heads inside the cathedral, but outside it was open season. So I do think, and I think Gilbert, who did the survey, he did a survey of ACT UP at some point, but it was sort of anyone who wanted to do the survey, and so it really wasn't the thing. But there was definitely, it was New York. There was Jewish and Catholic primarily. I mean, if you took the Jews, the Italians, and the Irish out, there would have been a very much smaller room.
It wasn't a waspy group.
No.
No. Wasps don't chant.
Ergo Peter. They buy power tools.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting question. More questions?
Or did that terrify everybody? Okay, this will be interesting.
Hi, full disclaimer, I'm Ron's younger brother, Rick.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Brought my family here from Sacramento. Question I have is kind of a personal one, which is, don't know if everyone knows this, but December 1 is not only World AIDS Day, it's also my brother's birthday.
Subtle, right? Like World AIDS Day, my Facebook thread is, happy birthday. These are the friends of mine who have died. It's like, really, it's quite a thread.
And that is exactly the question that I wanted to ask, which is, how have you handled that dichotomy, that duality occurring on what should be a happy occasion, which has also been labeled And let me back up a bit. It was bad enough growing up with the fact that my birthday was 2 days before his. My birthday was November 29th, even though I'm 2 years younger. So birthdays were always kind of a split occasion. But then to have your birthday also be designated World AIDS Day, how have you dealt with that?
I should also mention the day I was born was the day Flower Drum Song opened on Broadway. So to be here in San Francisco, where it takes place on my birthday, has tremendous resonance.
Stop deflecting. It's a serious question.
I enjoy being. It's been interesting. I mean, it is a weird. Actually, it's very Jewish, because it's you can't have the joy without acknowledging the pain. It's you can hold two things in your head at the same time. Sometimes it goes a little like the time we went and saw Falsettos on my birthday, the revival, and it was just like, oh my God, I hadn't listened to the album in since then. And Falsettos is a musical about the second music. There's two musicals. The second one is really about this family of choice, and the lover comes down with AIDS, and it's intense. And when we saw that, it kind of tipped over, and I kind of went into a little bit of a spiral, because it brought back a lot of things from that time. And it's my life, I mean, it's just sort of like, there's always, we lost so many people. I lost so many friends. It's always there. I mean, and actually the book, I talked to Carl about this. I mean, in some ways, the book was painful to do, but it was also a chance to spend time with all these people. I had to bring them back to life in some way. I read about them. My friend David, who's, when David got sick, he sort of followed throughout the book. That's David Serco. And, he died at Thanksgiving, 32, he was 32 years old in 1992. So I've now been alive twice as long as David. But so there's pain in that, but I also got to spend all this time with him writing this book. So I think that's what it is. It's always there, but the balance sometimes goes off. But that's my life.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else, or should we sign some books?
Okay. Okay.
What was that? Did you have a favorite?
There are a couple of favorites. I mean, one was not mine, which is really obscure, but it's when Reagan did his AIDS commission, there was a person named Corey Servas who ran her own mobile testing service. And so someone came up with a brilliant chant of Corey Servas makes us nervous with her mobile testing service. Which I wish was mine, because it's so good. Probably the one that people always say back to me, and it's not a good chant, but it's fun, was right before our City Hall demonstration, Ed Koch, who was mayor at the time, notoriously bachelor mayor, announced he was heterosexual. And there was a big headline on the New York Newsday with a picture of Koch. It was like, I'm heterosexual. And we had signs with like, and I'm Melina McCurry, and I'm Anna Mangiani. So yes, humor was always sort of a part of our group. And the chant I came up with, and it's not good, but everyone loved it, was like, City AIDS cares ineffectual thanks to Koch, the heterosexual. But if you want a good chant, I think the healthcare is a right. No, so it goes. Healthcare is a right. Healthcare is a right.
Act up.
Healthcare is a right. Healthcare is a pump up the budget. Healthcare is a right. Healthcare is pump up the budget. Healthcare. So it's like, and if you do that, you're marching in a circle. It becomes a conga line. It's great. So that's. That's that one.
I love that we both really saturate our books with chants. Kevin, my husband, in the Army of Lovers t-shirts on sale for $20. Speak to Kevin. Kevin said chanting is the love language of ACT UP, and it's true. And I remember in 2008 when in California we were so excited when Obama got elected, but it was the same moment when the voters said we can't get married, and so there was like a lot of street activism again around Prop 8. And I remember marching, and I was just in the back, starting up chants, like, hey, ho, ho, homophobia's got to go. And people weren't picking up on it. And I was like, oh, not everyone actually was educated to do this. It's not a thing everybody just knows. And it's not a thing that if you haven't gone to training the night before the demonstration with the other activists, you might feel a little intimidated by doing that. So maybe the legacy of these books is that chanting will get a resurgence in political protest.
Lovely.
We don't only have to go to rallies. We can march and chant,
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun.
With syncopation. Because you gotta
and
breathe.
rhymes.
You gotta breathe.
Although my favorite, which is in the book as well, it was just so punk. I loved it so much. Was we would do this outside the Catholic Church or something. We would go, they say don't fuck, we say fuck you. They say don't fuck, we say fuck you. Yeah.
Of course, the problem with that
Oh my God, he's reading me.
is but the problem with that is the TV cameras would be there, whatever, and they weren't going to film you.
Yeah, but it felt so
Oh,
good.
no, yeah, no. And the truth is that was probably the most honest chant of that demonstration, because that's why we were there.
Yeah.
For all the other conversation.
Yeah.
That's why that demonstration happened.
Yeah. I mean, we were fighting to still have sexuality. We were fighting because the church was saying condoms were immoral when condoms were saving our lives. Yeah, all that.
Yep.
Yeah. I need
But
a
enough
break.
about the church.
I think I need a break. Do you guys want to socialize and get books signed and all that?
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Turn up the music.
Yeah. It really is very special to be here and on Ron's birthday. So give him a happy birthday and buy some books.
Hey, Ron.